Okay, our next presenter is Shay Hodges and her husband, Ian Hodges, and I know they have a lot to talk about. Today they're going to be speaking from their business, Responsible Markets, and they've been doing, I believe you guys got a grant to help educate about ESG, which I have a little cheat sheet, environmental care, social responsibility, and good governance. And so they just returned from doing a presentation in New York. I think they have things to share about that, and I will let them take the floor. This is Maui's power couple.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, so I'm Shay, this is Ian. Responsible Markets is actually Ian's company, but I've been helping with this. So the Maui ESG project is, we're going to talk about that, and it actually builds on a lot of what different people have said today. So it was really great, different things that Ina said, the Lehman project, the gasifier, there's a lot of things that this builds on. But so ESG is environmental care, social responsibility, and good governance investment. And we'll go into that in a little bit more detail, but that's our project. Our project is a one-year project, which in the middle of it, which is 3 months from now, we're going to have an Ahupua summit. And again, that builds on some of what Mahina was talking about how Hawaii kind of does business in a circle, which I think in a way the whole world used to do or has done and has to learn to go back to, because what we're learning from global warming, climate change, is that everything is connected and the planet is too big to fail, basically. So we have to do this kind of manually for this work. Okay, so everyone in this room knows that the crisis is that, on a more global scale that affects us also, we're all dealing with the impacts of climate change, pressures on the natural environment, which is important from an environmental perspective, but also from a cultural perspective. Native Hawaiians depend on the environment for sustainability. We all do, but in a more direct sense, I think. Our economy, we have vulnerabilities as far as food security, which we've been hearing about today, and we're all very aware of. Water resources, leakage of profits off island, and as Mahina said earlier, the need for high-quality careers with opportunities for investment. All of that affects everything. Our kids not having jobs, not being able to stay here, not having, even if they can make enough money, not really thriving in their environments. It all has an impact. So we all recognize that besides the community just sort of taking power, which we are seeing happening in a very strong way that I think is a resource for sure, is that we also do need investment. All the things that we've been talking about today, some of it we actually have with our trusts. We have actually a lot of money in Hawaii in a certain way. But we do need investment, and even if we don't necessarily think we need investment, we're very attracted to investors. So they keep coming anyway. So that we have to deal with this on a certain level. But investment will also can help us diversify the economy. It can nurture innovation. It can prepare our next generation for the future of work. It can all be really good, but we also all really realize that there's a lot of influence from outside actors that doesn't always affect us the way we want it to. We're seeing from the mountain to East Maui, right? So how do we deal with that, basically? So the crisis, the challenge, so the opportunity. So as I said, institutional investors are increasingly identifying Maui County as a high-value investment opportunity if the capital is put to work in ways that have a measurable and demonstrable, right? You have to know that it's actually having a positive impact. Investors can benefit, and we can benefit. So ESG is a vehicle for that. So the impetus for our Ahupua investment project, and actually it's funny, when I first sent Georgia information about it a while back, she's like, cultural appropriation. We're not just using the word, it's actually a super important word for this particular project. So, and we'll get into that more. But maybe Ian can talk more about this. So institutional capital's role in worldwide investment. You want to talk about it?
Sure. So basically, there is, and this is an example that actually just happened in Maui last year, institutional capital. The basic definition for that is you have pension funds you have insurance companies, you have sovereign wealth funds, you have these big pools of capital that have billions of dollars, hundreds of billions of dollars. Two of those sort of pools of capital actually invested, actually more than two, but two big ones invested in Maui last year and became the largest private sector employer and the largest landowner. Obviously, the largest landowner was Mahipano. The largest private sector employer now is Blackstone, which is the biggest private equity firm in the world. So
they own, you didn't say what they own. They own Ritz-Carlton and the Grand Wailea. That's what the price is.
Yeah.
Just price.
They're Ritz-Carlton and Grand Wailea, and they paid the second highest price ever paid for a hotel in the United States for the Grand Wailea, $1.1 billion. And so what happens in that is you have these outside pools of capital coming in, and they're, obviously their purpose is to make a profit. And the question is, how do they intend to do that? Right. So a lot of the focus has been on Mahipano because that's more sort of visible to people. But the other question is, what is Blackstone going to do with these big hotels they own? And the money actually comes. Mahipano and Blackstone are both sort of private equity firms, which basically means they take money from other sources and they make a return on it. And Mahipano, as a lot of you probably know, got their money from a Canadian pension fund, PSP, and so they're expecting a certain kind of return, and they have a duty to actually their retirees. So basically, in a way, you can think of it that they're taking care of their kapuna, like with their Canadian pension fund, and it goes to this middleman, which is Mahipano. And the same thing with Blackstone. So that's one of the things. One of the things to start this was to start learning how do these investors work, how do they think, what are their motivations, because those two are very influential in Maui now. So it's good to actually understand that.
So in terms of understanding their motivation, a lot of times when Mahipano first came here, they were telling people, we don't really need to earn a profit, right? We don't need to make money. But of course,
in the short term.
In the short term. But their beneficiaries need to get their retirement. Just like, we all are probably related to somebody who's a beneficiary of the Hawaii State Retirement System. They have to get their pension, right? So understanding how that works is really important. The other thing that people may not realize, and this is true of Blackstone also, I think, is that Mahipano and Blackstone have committed to environmental care, social responsibility, and good governance. So environmental care is obvious, right? Caring for the environment. Social responsibility, that would be social issues, right? Making sure that, thinking about the homeless or different things like that. Good governance has to do with, a good example of, say, bad governance that you might have heard in the news recently is PG&E. And if you guys know about, California with the fires, where they had bad governance was rather than use their profits to make sure that they took care of things and there weren't fires, they paid their executives and other people big bonuses. So that's an example of bad governance. Transparency and accountability, those are key good governance. So a lot of stuff that Mahina was talking about earlier with community engagement, that's good governance, right? So on a board level, PSP, the pension fund, has committed to ESG principles. So they have a beautiful brochure that talks about all the great stuff they do for ESG, including Maui. So it's kind of surprising if you're a Maui person and you read it. And of course, we live in a world where you can do good PR. And actually, Mahina brought that up also earlier. We can always do good PR, right? So the question is, but there's a reason that they're not just doing it for PR reasons. They actually do understand that, particularly because of climate change, that ultimately in the long run, if they don't take care of this kind of thing, they will lose money. And we're seeing examples of that. We saw that with NextEra a few years ago. I think we're kind of seeing that on the Mauna right now. It's like, if you don't actually take care of things and respond to the community on some level, you're not going to make money in the long run, right? So this is so recognized worldwide now that the amount of assets that are under management with ESG integration has increased to 11.5 trillion, and is it doubling every year? I mean, it's increasing exponentially, really at a high level. So basically, what we're realizing why we started this is we have a lever with the ESG, right? If they hadn't committed to it, then there's no way we can sort of convince them to do the right thing. But the community has to understand not just institutional investing, but ESG and impact investing, which is similar but not quite the same thing, so that we can either attract the kinds of investors that we want, or the ones that are coming in, we can hold them accountable to these standards. And by doing that, we basically conquer the hourglass.
Sure. So one of the things that's actually happening in the investment world is that there are a lot of, because interest rates are so low, a lot of pension funds, a lot of college endowments, a lot of things are actually putting more money into private equity. And private equity basically comes and does what like Ahupua is doing, what Blackstone is doing, is they basically, these pension funds will provide money to like a Ahupua or Blackstone. They'll come in and look for an opportunity where they can sort of leverage value, right? They can, I'm not sure exactly what Blackstone's going to do, but they're adding rooms, they're adding little stuff to the Grand Malaya, and they're going to flip it. So down the road, they're going to sell it for a higher price, probably to another private equity firm. And what these pension funds are looking for, and these college endowments are looking for, they're trying to replace the investment returns they've lost because interest rates are so low. So where do you find this return? And so one of the issues that's happening is you have all this money out there in the world looking for smaller and smaller number of opportunities. And the other thing about it is you also have, because Shay mentioned PG&E, is you have a situation where climate change is actually impacting these large corporations. So PG&E, when the first fires happened, the first big ones happened a year ago, PG&E actually started moving to bankruptcy, and they lost about $25 billion in value in 10 days. So from the investor point of view, you just see that money just vanishing, like what happened? And so because of climate change, also because of inequality, you have these big investors realizing we have to do something different. How do we do that? And so there's actually a lot of money out there looking for investments, and they realize they need to do it in a way that actually is environmentally responsible and socially responsible. What the piece that's missing is having the people like Ahupua and the Blackstones of the world have the proper incentives to be able to do the right thing, and to be able to figure that out. And so that's sort of conquering the hourglass is basically, you see the hourglass, so you have the big top and it goes to the little thing and it goes on the bottom. Is what's that sort of little neck in between where you have this stuff go through? How do you figure out actually how to get the money to the right place? And also, how do you figure out how you're going to get a return for the investment, which is not necessarily a bad thing, because if it's a pension fund, like I was saying, you're basically providing for people's retirement. So you're taking care of a kapuna, whether they're in Hawaii or in Canada or somewhere else. But that's the trick, is to figure out how do you direct these large pools of capital in the right way so you can do good stuff.
Well, and I think part of the issue is like going back to the hotels. How often, living on Maui, how often do we hear about, oh, these guys bought this hotel, now these guys bought that hotel, now these guys, it's crazy, right? It's like they're just flipping back and forth, they're not adding any real value, and it's just how they make money. And in terms of how it impacts us, sometimes it has an impact, sometimes it doesn't. Maybe people's wages will go down, or we recently were out, well, not that recently, but in August when we were out in Hana with our partner, or actually it was July, the hotel was about to be purchased again, right? And we had a meeting with Shane Suzuki, and he said, my entire life, the hotel was about to be purchased, right? So it's like, and in a community like Hana, sometimes there's good owners, sometimes there's bad owners, but it creates this sense of, uncertainty. You don't know whether you're going to lose your job, and we're just being used, basically, right? I mean, it's like we don't get anything from it; they're just switching it back and forth. Meanwhile, whether it's the Limu, whether it's gasification, whether it's all the projects that Georgia was talking about, we saw this. We went up to John Dobbin's farm yesterday, and we were just blown away by the trout and the watercress, and it's like, why aren't there investments in these kinds of projects that are good for the community, that are good for the environment? And part of it is they just do things the way they always do things. And they have to learn to do things differently. And the great thing about Maui is we are attractive. We're attractive in all these different ways. We just have to figure out how to educate people. And it's not just about our grid, our closed grid, which is great because we have, when it comes to like the gasification, I assume you're here because you know we have the highest electric rates, and so it's, people can make money doing it where you maybe couldn't do it someplace else. If the Limu project is successful, you have this closed grid where you can see what the impacts of different things are in a much easier way. Maui Electric also sees that all the time as far as, you know, the wind turbines and different things you can see. We can see the impacts of things in ways that people in California can't, because we can't get things from other places, and we're stuck with whatever mess we make, right? So that can be a good thing if we're tracking and monitoring and we're, you know, using that information. So basically this is just, so our project goal, this is kind of small, but we want to develop a blueprint for Maui to become a financial and educational leader for the global advancement of effective impact investing with environmental, social, and good governance integration. We want to create a framework for guiding significant capital investment into Maui and Hawaii in a manner that creates measurably positive and sustainable impacts as identified by the community, which is tricky, but it's the only way it's going to work, right? So basically, we're trying to create the ecosystem that makes this possible and to be a model. So as we said, there's $12 trillion in ESG integrated assets under management. That was 2018. $2 billion of outside investment was committed to Maui in 2018. Our retirement system is pretty small, but $17 billion is the total invested by Hawaii's retirement system, and we have other trusts and other sources of money. And as Mahina mentioned, the deadline for Hawaii to reach 100% renewable energy is 2045. So that's an opportunity for innovation and investment. So our summit is going to be here at the college on January 31 and February 1. And basically it's going to be a 2-day outcomes-oriented summit, and we have kind of shifted this number a little bit. We're probably going to bring in about 25 to 50 investors, ESG impact leaders, including pension plans, sovereign wealth funds, foundations, endowments, private equity, and venture capital managers, and real asset managers to work with the community members to initiate the necessary steps to create the infrastructure. So what we want to do is have a summit where we have all these folks here, but for every one of them, we're going to have at least one, most likely 2 community members. And a lot of times when they go to these investment summits, they don't see the community members. They want to help them, but they don't really hear from them. So we're going to give them a little bit of a taste of what the community is like. And unlike a lot of the summits that happen on Maui, there's not going to be any charge. So we know, like, there's a lot of big conferences, and it's like $400, $600 to attend. Community members can't make it. So it will be invite only because we want the people who are doing the work. Because that's what we want to do, is we want to get the work done. And so part of it is educating the community. Because if you don't understand, and it's not like it's the hardest thing in the world, but if you don't understand institutional investment, you don't understand the concepts, you're not going to be interacting on a level playing field, and you might feel intimidated. So we've been going out to the community, and one of our first big community events, was out in Kaupo with Aloha Lani. She set it up for us, the Ahupua meeting, and we brought our partner Imogen from New York City. She's actually originally from London, and she came in on a Thursday night. She spent Friday in Wailuku, Friday night we drove out to Hana, Saturday morning she went out to Kaupo, and she gave a presentation about how institutional investing works and asset managers and how they think and everything. It was awesome. It was so great. And then we've also been doing classes here. You can't read this that well, but at the college, looking at the state retirement system, looking at electrification of transportation. Last week we had a good one on venture capital. And next week, or in 2 weeks, is our last one. We were going to do tourism, but I think we may be doing sovereign wealth funds instead, because we have somebody who wants to help us with that. So that's basically what we've been doing there. And so this is our partner, Imogen. So after we were at the Kaupo on our way back to Maui, she got to experience coming back to Freudians. So yes, we were Wailuku, and she got her feet in the mud. And that was, of course, really important, right? The whole thing of understanding the Ahupua, and that, you want to talk about the whole bye and the wealth?
Yeah, so one of the things Shay mentioned before, using the name Ahupua, is that we were just last week, I guess it was, or 2 weeks ago, Shay and I were speaking in New York at this investment conference, and there's Shay.
Where's me with my slightly older?
But basically, Shay was talking about place-based investing. I was talking about basically greenwashing or impact washing, which is basically means you kind of fake it, right? You just sort of do your boss for sure, and you're not really doing that. And so that's the thing I'm talking about. But the interesting thing is, one of the things is that Shay mentioned is it was actually a conference mostly focused on women who are investors. So that part was really cool. But it was all sort of investors. So they talked about the community. They kind of referred to the community. They're thinking about the community, but the community wasn't really there. So that's kind of one of the things we want to do differently. But the other aspect that was interesting about it is the panel that Shay was on, place-based investing. They discussed a number of different things, and at the end of it, they had some different options they wanted the audience to be involved in, and they asked them to vote. And one of the options was, what's happening with Maui's water system, and how do you sort of solve this with Maui Fund applying for this 30-year lease, and people in the audience, I was in the audience watching Shay, and I voted for this too, but basically people in the audience, I voted for her, but people in the audience all voted to actually deal with the Maui problem. And the interesting thing about it is we got these tables and talked about it, and basically the thing was looking at should there be an effort to actually acquire the EMI system and put it into public hands and sort of take control of the water. And the people who were around the table were like, what question are you asking? Because of course the answer is yes. Like you should, I mean, why would you leave us in private hands? Like what would you do here? So they didn't really know how we should help them because they already sort of thought the answer was obvious. But the larger picture with it is, with the Ahupua system, is that, going back to pension funds, is with climate change, one of the classes we actually had about I guess a month and a half ago that we had here right on the hallway. We had a professor from Stanford University who's an expert in climate change, an expert in investing in a way that actually addresses climate change. And he was coming in via Zoom, so it was a big screen. But it was in the middle of the blackouts in the Bay Area because PG&E had to black everybody out so they wouldn't cause fires. And so the interesting thing about that was, here he is, Stanford University, one of the top universities in the world. He's an expert in this. They're in the middle of the technology capital of the world, and there's no electricity. Because all the venture capital there, all the smart people who went to Stanford, they all are busy trying to figure out how to deliver, food and via, Uber Eats or whatever it is. They're not figuring out how do you deal with what happens when you have a pole that doesn't have the wrong thing, it's out in the middle of nowhere. So it creates a fire. So literally, we weren't sure we were going to get him to talk to us because there was no power in Silicon Valley. Which actually he used as an opportunity to sort of teach about is this is how bad the problems are, is it's dark in the technology capital of the world because we haven't bothered to figure out the solutions to the problems we actually need to figure out. But part of that is, with going back to the Ahupua system, is the way that pension funds and institutional capital works is that they have so much money under management, even the ERS, which is our public employee return system here, which is like 17 million, which is not that big, relatively speaking. It owns a piece of everything. So if you look at what they own almost every stock you can think of. They own all these foreign stocks. So what happens is, an example of this, that we have Whole Foods right down the road, is Amazon purchased Whole Foods a couple of years ago. So when that happened, and Amazon is like the second largest holding of the ERS. So anybody who's a retiree or expect to retire with the state system, Amazon's a part of your holdings, and so they make money, you get your retirement, that kind of thing. So Amazon stock price went up, Whole Foods stock price went up, but the price of Safeway, Kroger, all these grocery companies went down because they're worried that Amazon's going to enter the market, they're going to take it over, they're going to lose money. So what ends up happening is you have a zero-sum game because you own a piece of everything. If something goes up, and going back to the Ahupua, if Amazon takes over, then these other guys lose, and you own a piece of both of them. So you kind of go like this. using the example of the Ahupua system is that basically it's like if Amazon is the top of the stream and they're diverting the water, like imagine that, right? Where does that happen? What is your job, right? But if Amazon, of course, it's interesting to call Amazon, right? But if Amazon's diverting the water at the top of the stream, then everybody who's down below the stream who wants to go to Terra or wants to go to doesn't get the water. And so basically, taking the Ahupua system and looking at it as a model for actually how investment should work in the future is you have to think about how do you make sure that the water keeps flowing. And as most of the room probably know, Bai is the Hawaiian word for water, Bai is the Hawaiian word for wealth, right? So water, double water is wealth, right? And I think that's one of the things we actually want to do is recognize the fact that we're not just bringing investors here to say, hey, we need your, come save us, we need your money, whatever it is. It's like, actually, your system is not working very well. That's why Silicon Valley went dark. And you need to go back to figuring out, you need to have an Ahupua system for your investments, where you recognize it as the water. And if you think about investments, you heard about cash flow, you heard about pools of capital. There's all these water metaphors for investments. And really, money is the metaphor. Water is real, right? So going back to that thing of we need to have investments that actually keep the water flowing. So people at the top of the stream, it goes through, it comes back out, it goes to the bottom, keeps moving down. And that's one of the things we want to work on.
And I think that we have so much to offer in our community. I mean, we have these beautiful natural resources. Obviously, that's where people come. But when you think about, I kind of had an epiphany on Thursday because I was at the OHA meeting about water with the movie about East Maui. And I don't know if anybody actually said it, but I was thinking about the Bai, the wealth. And of course, we had just come from this symposium. We just come from New York City, this symposium, and it was all about, and I was actually, Ian's got a background in finance. I don't really, so I'm learning it, and I understand it. But people are talking about capital stacks and all these different sort of terminology in the finance world, and then I kept coming from a community perspective. But what I realized too is when we talk about, and I'm not Hawaiian, and I don't speak Hawaiian, but I know that when people talk about wealth and Bai in Hawaiian, they're not talking about money, right? They're talking about something that's a much higher level, and that is what. You can talk about it sort of from a philosophical level or spiritual level, what's been lost in the rest of the world as far as the pursuit of money and capitalism. But we're seeing things fall apart because of it. We're seeing things becoming destroyed, and we're running out of time. And that's why there is this whole movement towards ESG and impact investing, because it's not working. And they're recognizing it's not working, but they don't fully know how to do it, and they don't know how to measure it. And after the event, we also met with this young woman who works for this organization that is trying to figure out systems to track whether people's impact and ESG investments are actually doing good, right? Because there's all these different aspects. First of all, there's the whole PRing of it. You can always make everything look good. There's also the fact that it depends what you're looking at, right? So you might invest in something that seems like, oh, this is great. It created all these jobs, but then it destroyed this river. Or it, saved this environmental issue, but now there's no jobs, right? So figuring out how you look at again, and this goes back to the Ahupua, looking at the whole picture. And
so we actually, this has been triggering a lot about how do you translate the ethical responsibility of Kuleana? I think you can have one tera leaf, 2 tera leaf, 5 tera leaf is the most ethical.
Right. So that's part of what people are working on this internationally. There's actually this woman we met had gone to a school in London, and that's what they're working on. People aren't doing it enough, though, and that's part of why we are doing this at the college. There's a sustainability program here that's pretty strong. There's also all the continuing education stuff that's happening through the SLIM. And what we would like to actually ultimately see is that Hawaii, this is what we mean when we say Maui becoming a center. And this is not going to happen right after we have a summit, but ultimately, what if our kids are learning how to create this Ahupua beneficial audit, basically, and that people come to us and say, you tell us how to measure it. So there's all kinds of ways. This woman that we met with, I thought was super interesting, because who pays for it, right? So she said so the companies give their information, so they're paying for it, but of course they're making it sound as good as possible, right? So she said, we track all this data from the companies, but then we also look at newspaper articles, media, that's happening around it, and we don't look at any of the positive, because obviously that's just press releases, right? So we look at the negative, and then they have some kind of algorithm, right? But so that's one of the things that we want to work on with our summit. And yes, this was last week, and this is not the final agenda. We're actually trying to get this done now, but to give an idea of what we want to talk about is when we bring all these folks here, and the first day is going to be at the Laike room, is we're going to start with, and we have to figure out who our speakers are going to be, but talk about the history of investment in Hawaii. And you could practically, who are the investors, right? The big five corporate, you start with the overthrow, the big five sugarcane missionaries, they were investing and making money, but did it help our community? It wasn't an impact investment, right? And then talk about our specific history and geography and the Ahupua on Maui, and then how Maui can be this center, right? And then what does it mean to really invest with impact in the Hawaiian context? So what we want is for the folks who come here for the first hour to actually hear from the people in the community explaining what's happened here, what's the history and the context. And even though some of these people may have been here before, I'm guessing that they won't have heard a lot of this. And so we're going to have a bunch of different panels, and this is just the first day. And we are going to specifically look at an investment model for a publicly owned system. So we're going to actually connect with people before the summit, and create an actual blueprint for what that would look like. Other things that we want to also look at is electrification of transportation. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So one of the things, one of the people that we actually had when we were doing these classes, we had someone from My Electric, Greg, Dr. Kasegi, who actually is in charge of doing electrification of transportation, which is trying to get as many electric vehicles into Maui as possible. And there's a couple reasons for that. One is Hawaiian Electric, Maui Electric is actually producing a lot of renewable power. In the middle of the day, if it's windy and sunny, a lot of that power isn't necessarily used. It's curtailed. There's too much power. And so one of the things is, well, what can you do with that? And if people were charging electric vehicles during that time, then you're actually using power that's not being used. And so, there's a big impetus from the point of view of 100% renewables. There's a big push in the state towards having more electric vehicles. And that's something I think, frankly, there's a lot of areas that I think is right. Maui Electric's already ahead of schedule with the 100% by 2045, right? You have 38% now or something. So they're ahead of schedule, but in terms of the overall state of electric vehicles, we're actually kind of behind. We're still at 1%. There's 1,000 electric vehicles on Maui, a little bit more. We have one. But one of the things we're looking at is a model to not only introduce more electric vehicles on Maui, but to do it in a way that actually benefits the community, that creates economic development, that actually creates jobs. And so we're actually looking at a model to do that introducing them to the rental car fleet, and doing it in a way that actually, unfortunately, when they built I think most of you have probably seen the big rental car fleet building at the airports. When they built that, under the contract that built that, they decided not to put any sort of conduits for charging. And I know the big parking lot. So they didn't, and I know that there were certain people in the electric company were frustrated by that. But so you have this big electric, you have the big rental car fleet building that has not only did not have any outlets to charge, they didn't put the conduits in, so eventually you could actually do that.
So I get frustrated with. I want to hold them accountable.
Right. Well, that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
That's what this is all about.
Well, so the basic thing is looking at the model for how do we bring 1,000 electric vehicles, double the amount of electric vehicles, but do it in a way that actually that creates jobs, that actually puts money back in the community, and isn't just a way for, some big rental car company to come in and actually, add additional revenue and provide basically ultimately low-income jobs. And it's something also that I know that this goes back to what Shay was saying about us being an island. Is I was talking to earlier this week with a guy who's wanted to talk to guys at this thing called Electrification Coalition that basically is looking at doing this nationally. And the benefit for doing something like this in Maui, and they actually tried this in Orlando, is that because we're an island, if you introduce 1,000 electric vehicles and you're sort of tracking them, our power is not going anywhere else. I mean, the power that my electric produces, they don't sell it to anybody else. It's just for us because we're an island, right? So in terms of actually tracking and be able to sort of look at what's the impact of all these electric vehicles, how do we charge them, we're actually like this little testing center to do that. So that makes it very valuable. And one of the things to look at is people talk about that a lot. They talk about Hawaii being a testing center. So one of the things also to look at as a model for how do we as people in Maui and Hawaii, how do we benefit from this? And we're just not just guinea pigs, like feed us little pellets and see what we do. That we actually have some way that if we prove a system, a way of doing something, that we have a residual benefit from actually demonstrating that. So that people, if we test something in Maui or test something in Molokai or wherever it is, we test something in Hana, that you actually have a way to actually benefit the whole community from being the people who sort of took the time to figure this out.
So part of what we're doing with this summit is, if you've been to conferences, there's a lot of conferences where you sit and you just listen to people talk. Here we have back and forth, so it's not this bad. But we want to make sure that it's actually a working summit. So we will be starting actually this week, next week, we're going to start putting together like a little team of say 10 people. So to look at the electrification transportation, or to look at the water situation. And if you have been paying, I'll go back to that side in a minute, but I'm on the board of water supply, and we did this temporary investigative group report to look at the potential of buying out the water delivery system. So starting with that report, or with the electrification, what we want to do is have a group of 10 people, 3 or 4 who are these finance people from the mainland, or like this guy that Ian just mentioned, who have a lot of that kind of expertise, but also have our leaders, whether it's somebody like Kelly King or Cameron Rollins or somebody else, on this group, as well as people who are on the ground who are doing the work here. And so that it's a working group that starts meeting and meeting virtually a couple times before the summit and then the day before, and then we are going to present it, and obviously it won't be like, oh, we're ready to go, but it'll be far enough along, because what we're realizing, going back to what Lisa said about, how do you hold these people accountable, that people accountable. Ian and I have been involved in politics in Hawaii. We met on the road to Hana protesting a golf course in 1993. We've been involved in this for a while. We actually have some really enlightened leaders. We have a real change, and we have people who are stuck in sort of the status quo, and they need to see examples of what can work. And a lot of us know what can't work, but what we want to do is help present what can work. And it may not be the best idea, maybe there's a better idea, but we start working towards it. Because I think that's part of the issue, is people need to see that there are other people from the outside who are willing to invest in it, right? So that if we're saying to the county, you could easily come up with, the EMI system is $5.4 million, they only paid for half of it so far. We could come up with that easily, but there's this kind of fear. But if somebody from the outside says, like we met with the Heron Foundation, says, oh, well, we want to help you with that, the county might be more willing to do it, because there's that fear of doing something different. Let's do it the same way we always did it, because if we messed up, it's fine, because nobody's going to get mad at us for doing it the same way we always did it, right? So that's part of what we're trying to do. I sort of forgot my train of thought there, but
Well, I was going to say, going back to the electrification of vehicles, and Amelia had her presentation, and I think actually everybody likes to sort of be mad at the utility, and especially like Amelia was saying, when your power goes out, you're like, where's my power? and then if you're friends with me on Facebook, which I recommend, then you can just message her, and you can say, Nina, where's my power? And hopefully her batteries are still working so she can finish it. But part of the thing is, I mean, frankly, there's a guy that came in from New York who works at this company called Block Power, where they're actually doing, and he came in and we met with Mahina and other people in My Electric, and he came in and actually, he's a former community organizer, and basically they're working and bringing renewable energy and photovoltaics and actually doing public housing projects, and really having people in the community who aren't just the affluent people really benefit from this stuff. And we do actually have, and he came in after we met with My Electric. He actually said the kind of stuff that Mahina was showing, earlier today. He was like, that doesn't happen anymore. I mean, that level of community engagement from an electric utility. And there's lots of things you can actually legitimately complain about My Electric about. I think, and I'm sure Mahina has her own private complaints.
No, she doesn't.
But is that we do actually have really good people working. I mean, people are from Hawaii, they have family here. So wherever you go, there's actually good people working there. And one of the things with electrification is My Electric is and Hawaii Electric are regulated utilities. So just like Mahina was saying, they have to go through this whole RRP process. They have to get done by the PSC. So there's things the community can do. We know the electric company actually wants more electric vehicles. Like that actually helps them. But for them to initiate that themselves or to sort of do that, it's this whole, like we talk about 18 months even to sort of get started. So one of the things you want to be able to do is do things where you bring in investment that actually helps what already needs to go on. So we're taking advantage of the fact that we can move quicker than My Electric. And but at the same time, being in communication with them and saying, like I had a public conversation with Greg at My Electric and saying, if you guys had your ideal, where would these electric vehicles be? Where would they be charged? What time would it be? So that kind of thing would be really open to the community. And the other piece of it is, when you're talking about institutional investors, one thing is they can't make small investments because they're so big. So to them, they have to make a $20 million investment minimum, or maybe 40, 50 million. And we were, like Shay mentioned, yesterday we were up and seeing John's. He's doing trout, he's doing watercress, and he's telling us what his needs are. So he needs these different things that are, a couple $100,000 or less, and he can actually make this thing totally viable and doesn't know where to get the capital. But that's actually too little money for most investors. Can't do that because it takes just the same amount of due diligence to do a $100,000 investment as it does to 10 million. It takes a little more. But so part of the thing is looking at how to structure investment coming in so you can get $40 million, let's say, but you do it in a way so it actually benefits the community. So you make the governance structure so people are benefiting, but you can take advantage of let's bring in $40 million, let's bring 1,000 electric vehicles, but let's set it up in a way that benefits the community so people are actually benefiting, in their families, they can support their families, we have a better Maui. And that's kind of what we want to do is set that model.
Yeah,
So you wouldn't be able to divide up that $41 million kind of deal, like I support this guy, support that guy, support that guy.
So one potential, that's a good question. So the answer is yes. So you want to bring it in, so it's one investment, but then you want to divide it up. So with electric vehicles, one way to do it would be to actually have people could actually have, let's say you have a family that basically says, okay, we want 10 electric vehicles, right, in our family, that we'll actually sort of have control over. That'll go into a car fleet, and then we'll actually get income from that, and we'll take care of them. And I'm oversimplifying it, but you basically buy it. So if you go to the vehicle manufacturers and you say, we're going to buy 1,000 of these vehicles, so you guys give us a good deal, right? And you help us set up the charging stations, all this kind of stuff. But once you do that, then you come down and say, okay, what families actually want to be part of this? And we're actually talking to UHNC, very preliminary, about you could charge some vehicles here, they could have their students involved in it, it's a way for them to make a living.
So basically, the creativity that we need to have is how do we figure it out, because we are a small community. So like when we were out in Ahupua and Olaf was telling us about issues with power, which is water, and probably those investments would be too small for an institutional investor, right? Or just like if you said, oh, I want to do some kind of churro thing and have a rental car, that would be too small, or somebody wants to do a little pickle thing or whatever. But the creativity has to come in where we figure out how do we make it into a bigger investment that's like sort of more like a
co-op or something like that. And that's actually an important thing to solve, not just in Hawaii, right? So we're basically saying, how do we figure out a way where an institutional investor would invest in our community as a whole? And what are the different vehicles for doing that? And obviously the community engagement is going to be a big piece because what's important in East Maui is not necessarily what's important in Hula, it's not what's important in Lahaina. So we're not like a homogenous, place, but we are people that all care about each other, and I think we can figure it out.
Well, just when you said co-op, that's kind of where my head was going. Like if there was a way to gather 6 or 7 or 8, maybe like we are part of Olo'olo Culture Reserve or the Community Fund, and having all of these like cultural and natural resource preservation areas that all together we're looking for a single investor and then doing that like that. Is that
Right,
something?
that's the possibility.
Yeah. Okay.
And so,
Sorry.
I just lost my train of thought. But yeah, so that is the key thing, and there's all kinds of different investors. We talked recently about to these water impact investors that could help invest in the watershed. Because when we were talking about East Maui, and they said, we find investors who want to have an environmental impact. They also want to have a return, but it doesn't have to be a huge return. If you have some environmental return, impact, then we're willing to take a smaller return. So there's different kinds of vehicles for different things. And when you're talking about cultural, I would think that's part of it too. But one thing to recognize that, and we're going to finish up, and then we got one more. We see that we have a really, really strong community. We have resources, and those resources to me, and I've lived, Ian's lived in Hawaii his whole life, but I've been here for 27 years, and I have never seen the strength that I'm seeing now. I mean, it's amazing to me. And I think I hear ideas all the time where the stuff that we're talking about doing, I feel like everybody is ready for that. I feel like everybody's already doing it. It's not like we have all these great ideas. It's like we're just saying we want to help figure out how to connect those ideas because I think the time is totally right.
I have one closing question. How do you get on your invitation list for your Ahupua Summit?
And then we see also like on the working groups for like places that affect our community.
Yeah. So we're actually so the website is mauiesgproject.org, and I need to we have to get this agenda done and put it up on the website. That's like the thing that has to be done in the next couple days. And then we're going to put together a registration, and basically I have to figure this out because I don't want to be like, oh no, you can't come, right? But basically figure out what people's interest is, and we want people who want to do the work. So, basically I'm going to get this up in the next week or two where you'll say what you're interested in, and how you're interested in participating, and then we're going to figure it out from there. So it's a work in progress. But definitely you can always reach out.
What movie is that first picture?
That's Wailuni. That's
No.
Junior.
Wow, that looks great.
Yeah. It wasn't my favorite picture of mine.
Aloha has
Shay,
Oh,
I have
sorry.
a question.
Yeah.
Okay, so when I look at this, so I'm using my financial administration trial RCND for Ahupua only. Now, when the bill was set up in 2006, there was supposed to be funds for us from that time down to 2019. Nothing. But that didn't stop any of us. Now, when you look at the structure of the Ahupua, it's our ancient system that when America illegally took over and adopted, it became DLNR with the 6 divisions, right? Under the same principle under Ahupua. Now we're in Act 212, and then Keoahu has his nonprofit underneath, so that we can work as a legal entity with a nonprofit entity to help the communities. Now that in itself breaks down into 6 categories of air, land, water, and so forth, the 6 committees. That also partners with all these entities or nonprofits, communities, and whatnot that can help to stimulate them financially to do their work and continue. So I'm just looking at the structure from top to bottom, but really it's from the bottom, the people bill, going to the top. So it's a cycle. When you look at the Ahupua, like the water rains down the mountains, hits the ocean, evaporation, it's the same principle.
Yeah.
So just kind of helping you guys get that concept, but I think